I welcome you, dear students, once again on the subject of research design, and here we are going to look at qualitative methods or qualitative research. In the previous video, we looked at research design in from the quantitative perspective. Here we're going to look at the qualitative perspective. So we want to be able to cover several things or to achieve certain objectives by the end of this session. Some of these things we shall discuss in detail. For example, when we look at qualitative research questions, we shall have a discussion on that, on hypothesis and qualitative research questions. But we essentially want to see how to develop a robust qualitative design. We want to look at, these are things that are major in our discussions. So first of all, we want to understand why qualitative research, because we have two differing paradigms or approaches, qualitative and quantitative. So why should we have qualitative? Everything stems from what it is you want to do, why you're doing your research, what is your research and why are you doing it, what are you trying to discover. There's no point in time where we should at any point in time say one research is greater, one approach is greater than the other. No. The reasons for selecting the approach really depend on your kind of research. So the qualitative research comes in to try and discover those areas where quantitative methods really can't support. Usually quantitative methods don't focus on, have very limited contact with people. If you look at the primary method, data collection method and tool that are used are questionnaires. Those, you find a researcher, the questionnaire is submitted to the respondent, and the respondent may probably take at most maybe 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and the researcher has barely talked to this respondent and doesn't know how they feel about certain things and is only selecting a very small part of the life of this respondent or a particular setting. So there's very limited contact. Quantitative research is also focused on variables and their relationships. So that is can be a very narrow view of a subject area. When we want to do a research that has a holistic understanding, quantitative research can be quite limiting. So essentially, when we're looking at qualitative research, we're looking at trying to discover a holistic view or perspective of a certain phenomena. We are trying to understand the perceptions of participants. If I'm given a questionnaire and this questionnaire is asking me for my age, gender, and it's asking me maybe how many times I'm using a certain application, and I state this number of times, and then you ask me questions on functionality, rating it, and so on and so forth. It may not get maybe a certain feeling I may have about it, which I may bring up in a discussion, in a more detailed discussion. Take an example. You may ask me my perception on the functionality of a system, and I give it a very low ranking, and yet this system actually functions very well. I may give it a low ranking simply because I am angry about something. Maybe I'm angry because of the training I received, the way that the system was maybe forced down my throat. I felt like it was being forced down my throat as a user. Those perceptions may be missed out. Normally, as a researcher collects data, because they are picking out, they're trying to get a holistic view, and they may pick information about this, about that, about the other. What happens is the researcher is identifying themes that emerge from the data, as opposed to quantitative research, which is looking at relationships between two variables. Here we are picking out themes. We get a story, and as we pick the story from this perspective, that perspective, we come up with themes. Later on, as these themes grow further into a theory, the themes later on also become variables when somebody else is trying to do quantitative research. But in qualitative research, we're starting by developing themes. The main focus of the research is to understand the ways in which people act and account for their actions, their explanation. We may find out somebody did this, but we also find out why the person did that. So we have a number of paradigms here in qualitative research, paradigms and perspectives. First thing is we understand is that it's naturalistic. We want to understand the totality of something. And qualitative research essentially came after the positivist movement was developed. After, if you are ICT professionals, I'm sure all of you have encountered the movement or the thinking behind um, open source technology and proprietary technology, open source licenses and proprietary licenses, the war between Windows and Linux. And you understand that it is a thinking, it is a belief. We know that open source was started essentially by ICT professionals who were frustrated with the Windows operating system. We know that. And we know that it is a movement that started after the thinking behind proprietary software was frustrating to ICT professionals. So it is the same thing here with qualitative thinking and perspective. It is post-positivism. Secondly, it's focused on realism, or what people would like to say, whose reality counts. Okay? Whose reality counts. When we are thinking about the positivist perspective, it's really the researcher's thinking that is determining the result. For example, if as a researcher, I'm starting from the point of saying that the girl child's performance is affected by her treatment at home, I am actually predetermined in my thinking. I'm actually predetermined. I'm actually saying that there are certain conditions at home that may affect the girl child at school. Whereas in the qualitative research, they are saying no. We start from the perspective of the one who is going through that problem or that issue. So we start by going to the girl child and asking her, and maybe sitting down with her or living life with her to understand what are the things that are affecting her performance at school. And you work with her at home, at school, in between her friends, and so on and so forth. And you get a holistic view of all the things that she goes through before coming to the conclusion of what is it that affects her performance. Basically, that is what realism is talking about. You find also this perspective affecting areas, let's say, of development studies, where new theories of development have come up, where originally people thought that if we bring industrialization, we shall bring about development, and that didn't work. Others said, okay, we bring about structural development where we develop healthcare, education, and so on and so forth. and development will come about, and that also didn't happen. And then rural development thinking started, where professionals now began to say, whose reality is it that counts? If someone is poor, start by asking that poor person, what is it they want changed? What is it that is causing them problems, and what exactly is it that they want to change, and how do they want to change it? Coming back to the question of whose reality counts. So it's the same thinking that drives qualitative research. We have the other progressive thinkings. We shall not delve much into them because they won't affect us. But we have things like feminism. This is a huge area in qualitative research. I remember yesterday I gave you an example of a research that was being done in Tanzania, where this researcher focused on one couple and followed the woman in a space of 1 year, where she developed a friendship, went with her to her doctor's appointment, and so on and so forth. So these are areas, these are thinkings that essentially have driven qualitative research. We shall not focus on that. We shall focus on mainly realism, because realism is really, and it's something that will drive ICT and ICE research. So some qualitative research strategies, we have seen some of them, others we won't bother so much. Case study research, that is one area that is quite common with IS and ICT research. Ethnography, we've discussed this and extensively, so I won't repeat it. Ethnomethodology research, which investigates people's everyday procedures for creating and managing situations. We won't look at it much. Phenomenology, where we explore things that may be taken for granted, certain existing phenomena that exists in a certain context. Now, normally, this phenomena, we may research it in a case study approach, in an ethnographic approach, whatever approach, but essentially all research in qualitative research approach is looking at a phenomena. Grounded theory, we have also discussed this. We won't look at it much, but we have discussed it, so we won't repeat it here. Action research, we have looked at this. This is also a highly qualitative research approach. Narrative analysis. So this one really in centers on really reporting verbatim what the respondents, what people who are living a certain experience, what they think, and the researcher basically defaults himself or herself and does not try to interpret, but simply brings things as they are. I think Susan gave us an experience of research that was done in the Netherlands with people who are living, people with the substance abuse disorder, and where these people opened up to the researchers and even said, quote my name. That is really somebody even insisting on their narration, on their story, what they believe, their perception really coming forward. Cultural studies and gender studies. So these are also other kinds of research, but we shall not delve much on them. So what is the process that qualitative inquiry takes? Just like quantitative, we first focus on what it is we want to inquire, determine the focus of our research. What is it we want to explore? Now, the next thing we look at, creating research questions. Unlike quantitative research, where we create research questions and then come up with a hypothesis, with qualitative research, we stop at the research question. We do not move forward to a hypothesis. So normally this research question is white, and we shall talk about it later, where we look at things like assess, determine, impact, effect, things like that. So those are the verbs we normally find in those research questions. We shall also have a detailed discussion on hypothesis and research questions. After that, we look at our unit of analysis. Where are we going to pose this question? Is it in a case study? Is it in multiple case studies? Essentially, this is where we determine if am I going to put this to one person, for instance, like the example I gave you of the lady who did research in Tanzania, where she focused her unit of analysis was this couple, this one couple in Tanzania. If I give you a look at my research, which said I'm going to look at Nindye, the specific area of Nindye Parish in Nkozi sub-county. Another person will say, my unit of analysis is going to be an organization. Somebody yesterday asked that, what if I want to do my research in my workplace where I've observed something? Your unit of analysis may be that particular organization. Within that organization, you may want to look at a particular department or departments which are affected by this research question, or where this research question can pick a certain amount of data. Then we look at our data types, the data method, data collection methods, and tools. Yesterday we saw some of them, but when we look at this slide, we see that qualitative research even gives us more. What kind of data do we want to collect? Is it from interviews, focus group discussions? We can use diaries, we can use field notes, we can use photos, we can use videos. All of those are data collection tools and methods. Okay? We also look at sampling. Now, normally when we talk about sampling, we think about it in terms of quantitative. In also qualitative research, we can have sampling. We shall look at it in the slides that will follow. There are also certain specific sampling strategies focused on qualitative research. Then how we shall analyze our data. We shall have a specific topic on data analysis. But all those are things to think about. Now, volumes of data differ based on whether you're doing qualitative or quantitative research. Normally, in qualitative research, our research area may be very small, but our data collected is normally huge. So if you look at this diagram, we are seeing that on the side, for qualitative side or the inductive side, the volume of data, remember the research question is usually wide. The volume of data collected is or the focus may be a bit wide, and the data collected is it may be focusing on a narrow place, but usually huge amounts of data. You find somebody who is looking at qualitative research is going to use interviews, is going to use documents, is going to use observation, may also add focus group discussion, and all of these bring out what we refer to as triangulation. Now, in inductive research, you find the volumes of data, the research area is tight, the focus is quite tight, where somebody says, I'm looking at this independent variable affecting this dependent variable. Very small area. The hypothesis really narrows it down. Then their sampling, the sampled area is huge, where they may distribute their data collection tool to a huge area, maybe to 1,000 respondents. Let us give an example. They're looking at just two variables and then distribute it to a huge number of people. Contact with your research area is extremely small. So you see here, then the data collected becomes much less. If you look at this side and the opposing side, it's much smaller. The person on the qualitative side may select from so many areas, but strictly focus on one case study. Look at the example of the lady in Tanzania who focused on one couple. In 1 year, she must have collected so much in terms of a narration from the respondent, in terms of what she saw in the space of 1 year, the time she went for doctor's appointments with her respondent, maybe came and sat home with her and had lunch with her, and so on and so forth. There must have been huge amounts of data she collected, but she focused on only one couple in a space of 1 year. On the deductive side, the person will take a much smaller amount of time. Like I said, you may give out a question and takes a respondent maybe even 10 minutes to fill it out. You may collect your data in a space of a month. This person may take 6 months, a year to collect a sufficient amount of data to be able to answer the research question. Those are the differences between the two. Sampling strategies that are unique to qualitative research. First is intensity sampling. Remember, everything starts with what you want to research, what kind of data you want to research. Let us say you want to find out, to understand how universities are faring as far as e-learning is concerned. You may notice that when it comes to e-learning, who are the people who are involved in e-learning? Well, it's the academic staff and students. So if I wanted to find out the picture of how e-learning is going on in a particular case or different cases, I would then focus on the academic staff and the students. It wouldn't make sense for me to go to the finance department. It wouldn't make sense for me to go to the registry department. It wouldn't make sense for me to go to the estates department. It's better for me to go to faculties and their staff and students, because these are people who are involved in the research. So there I am specifically focusing on where I'm going to pick the most amounts of data regarding my subject area. Two, we may pick an area where there are several cases, there are several people who experience a certain phenomena. But because it is qualitative research, I can't go and research all areas. So what I do is I pick a typical case. I'll give you the example of my research. I was looking at health applications in rural areas. Now, Uganda is has quite a number of rural areas, but because it was qualitative research, I wasn't going to go to Gulu, to Kabarole, Kienjojo, to Kabale, Kisoro. I wasn't going to go to all those areas because all those areas have rural areas. They have some areas which are urban and some areas which are rural. So what did I do? I gave a definition of a rural area, and then I picked the area that was convenient for me for my research, which was Nindye, and I demonstrated that this area it's typical of any rural area. It has the typical characteristics of of a rural area. So in other words, I focused on what is normal in a rural area and what is average in a rural area and the rural population. The third is snowballing. So what do I mean by snowballing? Let us say I want to do research on the drug cartel in Uganda. Now, we know there's nowhere I'm going to go and they tell me, oh, so and so is part of a drug cartel. That's not possible. So what I would do is snowball sampling. So for example, I may decide to attach myself to start the research by attaching myself to maybe somebody who abuses drugs, spend time with them and get to know them. And as I get to know them, I find out who their dealer is. And maybe I develop a friendship. Maybe I also even say I'm buying drugs from this person and using that kind of strategy. And this person maybe then lets me know with time, he lets me know who his supplier is. And with that process, I'm moving higher and higher up the food chain, should we say, let's put it in quote unquote, the food chain of the drug cartel. That is the snowball, what they call the snowball effect. I move to this leads me to this, and leads me to the other. That is just an extreme case of the snowball sampling, but that's another sampling technique. Theory-based sampling. Here, you select cases based on variables or certain characteristics that are defined in a certain theory. So your theory would be your guiding light to select a particular area. So here I'll give an example. Let's say you are doing research using term theory, and which looks at gender and or usability and usefulness. And you say, I'm going to select cases that represent these two areas, usability and usefulness. And you say, I'm going to do research based on that, on gender and ICT use. That's a typical example of using the theory. Now, in qualitative research, we need to look at the role of the researcher, because the researcher is very much in contact with the research subject or research subject area. The researcher is normally heavily involved with the research participants. So what does this mean? It means an emotional attachment does develop. That is a key point to note. And the researcher at all times must look at their emotional attachments. I gave you the example of my research where I spent 2 years with a community. Of course, relationships were formed. I remember at a certain point when I attended so many workshops, as the participants would go ahead to sign for transport refund, they would call me and say, Sheba, come and sign. Not knowing I'm a researcher, I'm not meant to participate in that. But I remember even when it was time for lunch, they invited me for lunch, sit down. I became part and parcel. And at a certain point, they even mistook me to be one of the health workers. So those emotional attachments come in. And the researcher must understand, they must also begin to pull out and to see areas where their emotions may affect their interpretation of data they have collected. A researcher must be able to demonstrate theoretical sensitivity. This goes back to because the researcher is very much in contact with their research subjects and research case studies and areas. A researcher may bring in their emotions to become part and parcel of the research. So the researcher must always go back to theory or the guiding principles of research. They must, at all times, as they carry out their data collection, analysis, and so on and so forth. The insightfulness, this is where you examine yourself internally, trying to be insightful of your emotions. Try to perceive situations holistically. You can tend to be biased, especially if you pick a certain variable, a certain theme, and you run with it. Try to pick the totality of the situation. Take an example. If you are doing a research on an on a system in IS or an innovation in ICT, a framework, and so on and so forth, try and understand all perspectives concerning that innovation, that artifact. Somebody may fail to use a system because, one, it's maybe not user-friendly, but There's also the other perspective. This person may have limited computer literacy skills. This person may be biased towards the system because they feel it's going to give, they may lose their job. So you try to get the entire total perspective, the picture, so you can give a holistic view and an unbiased view. So all of that is simply to reduce bias as you're reporting back. Literature in qualitative research. What does the role of literature play? Now, when somebody is doing quantitative research, and especially reporting back on data, they usually point back to literature on what, because normally with quantitative research, this is research which has been extensively done, and somewhere, somehow, somebody has reported. Whereas qualitative research, when they're especially reporting back or gathering data, there's usually limited or no information from published data. So where does literature play the biggest role? First, it starts with our problem formulation. It starts with our problem formulation. It will help us do our theoretical framework, guide us in empirical data, ensuring that we have rigorous research and methodology. Now, once we collect our data must have been, but for us to collect our data, it must have been guided by theory. Yeah, you must have a theoretical framework that is guiding how you're going to collect this data from your context area. What do I mean? I'll give you an example again from my research, where I was trying to identify from a rural context things that may affect the sustainability of an mHealth application. So did I simply go and observe? No. I started from theory. I went to rural development theory to tell me what is of value to a rural health seeker. So I started from literature. What are the things that literature seems to point out that are of value? Then when I went into the context, I used development theory to find out what are the vulnerabilities, what are the things that rural people feel affect their health the most. I asked them and also observed. And then I asked them, what then would you think would help overcome these challenges? And I compared to what literature said. Then to determine what is it that was going to affect the mHealth application, I went to business models, because business models tell us what is of value, what is it that can generate value. So I used business model theories and toolings to help me gather from the context what may affect the value or the sustainability of an application. So it helped me gather my data. It also helped me analyze my data. This is what literature, this was the contribution of literature. So how would we collect qualitative data? One, we have discussed many of these interviews. So these interviews can be what we refer as structured, semi-structured, or completely unstructured. So a structured interview is where you'd have your predetermined interview questions. Then, if it is semi-structured, this is where you may deviate. You may ask an open-ended question and even deviate depending on what the respondent says. If it is unstructured, you can simply begin with a discussion, but this collects really huge, large amounts of data because the respondent can say anything, whatever it is they feel about a subject. Observation. So observation can be done either overt or covert. So I'll give that again. I'll give you an example of like the workshops I attended with my community where I simply came and sat and listened. Covert is where you as a researcher, your presence may not be felt or actually seen. Somebody else may observe on your behalf, or you may have a camera somewhere, something like that. And people begin to discuss and you observe. You may decide to observe using documentation, where you look at documentation, maybe of an organization or something, and it gives you information about something. Some people will have an observation checklist, especially if you're using theory to come and collect your data. You may have an observation checklist so that you pick out the things that you need to observe. Now, observation is non-participatory. Yeah, it can be non-participatory where the researcher simply sits and watches things going on. It can also be participatory, especially in action research, where you implement an artifact and you participate with stakeholders. As you participate, you're picking out things that are happening and recording them. We can use visual sources where we can take pictures, we can record videos, and so on and so forth. And then we later on use those videos and those recordings as part of our raw data, which we then analyze and pick themes from. We can also use documentation. We can use existing reports, contracts, websites, and so on and so forth. So these documentations can have a wealth of information. This kind of data collection is referred to as an unobtrusive measure, because here you're not interacting with actual participants, but recordings. You may look at minutes of a meeting, you may look at reports, and so on and so forth. IS researchers use this method, this data collection method, extensively. Say you're developing a system and you want to understand business processes. Documentation can help you do that. If you want to understand underlying policies and guidelines that determine the way certain business processes are done within an organization, you can use written policies to understand how to design your system or what your system functionality should involve, or certain data protection strategies you may have, or what kind of users, what each user may access or may not access. You can use existing policies that are within an organization, and those policies become part and parcel of your data collected and which you relied on to build your system. Diaries. Now, these diaries can be used. A diary is a data collection strategy or method that can be used as research is going on. A researcher, as they are in the field, as they are interacting with participants, they can make a habit of writing down in a diary their feelings and thoughts and experiences, either positive or negative. They write this down. And as they do that, they later on use this as part of the data they have collected. Now, a key point to note before we discuss the ethical elements is that in qualitative research, we may use quite a number of data collection tools to ensure, number one, richness of data collected. The richness of data helps us to triangulate our results and therefore give that reliability and validity. So it is important that a researcher selects a number of data collection tools. Whereas in quantitative research, somebody may rely strictly on a questionnaire or strictly on secondary data, and that is enough. In qualitative research, have several of these. Now, this then leads us to the issue of the ethical checklist. One of the things we want to do is to ensure validity of our research. So by the mere fact that you have several research or data collection methods, you're validating your research. Because qualitative research is very much concerned with active and intense communication or interaction with participants, the issue of privacy and confidentiality is key. It's extremely important. Getting informed consent from your participants. We discussed this extensively yesterday. When we look at things like morality and effectiveness of our research, the issue of adopting multiple data collection tools is one of those things that we pinpoint that helps us to answer the question is, have I done my research effectively? Have I adopted a number of data collection tools so that I can triangulate my research and my findings? Have I used appropriate generalization? Now, even if you have used a number of data collection tools and you have confirmed and affirmed existence of certain variables or themes, at the end of the day, question what you report. This is where we use languages like, because this exists, this probably means that this exists, or this principle exists, this variable exists, and so on and so forth. Generating validity. We have discussed it implicitly in the previous slides, in the previous lectures, but these are just some of the techniques we may use. We have talked about triangulation, yeah, uh, being very specific as when we sample, when we make a decision of where exactly am I going to collect my data from? What will be my unit of analysis? Providing verbatim transcripts. We talked about this yesterday, where in certain instances, we insist on reporting precisely what it is a respondent says. Demonstrating prolonged engagement in the field. If you're doing qualitative research, you can't say I've done this for a week or a month. It should be for an extended period. It really should be for an extended period of time. Demonstrating persistent observation. That is basically you can't say I came in one day, I observed, and that is it. No. You must have come today, the next week, the next month, something like that. So you collect substantial amounts of data. Basically, the key point here that we are trying to say is collect huge amounts of data if you're doing qualitative research. One of the strategies you can adopt if you want to generalize your research in qualitative research is develop a multi-case study strategy. Okay, develop a multi-case study strategy. We talked about this slightly. I remember when we had our first lecture where there was a group which was presenting a research on developing, I think, a framework for interoperability, where Finland decided to study several countries. I think it was US and some other European countries. You can also develop a multi-case study strategy. Take an example if you're doing research, let's say on e-learning, and you say, I'm going to look at UMU, UCU, and maybe Cavendish, 3 universities, okay? Or then I'm also going to add maybe Makerere and so on and so forth. In that case, you can say that if I've found this variable in UMU, in UCU, in Cavendish, it means this variable truly, that this thing actually does exist and does affect e-learning, or it exists it may affect adoption or use of e-learning once you have a multi-case study strategy. Now, in generalizing, it's important that a qualitative researcher understands that you must practice caution. I have said this over and over again. As you're writing, as much as you may have found, let's say you're doing multi-case study strategy, or you've done triangulation and you've identified a certain theme over and over again, as you report, be cautious and still state, this probably means this. In other words, recognize your limitation. Recognize your limitations, especially with time periods. Normally, there are challenges that come with reporting where they say, okay, you might have discovered this in this time. Maybe in 5 years' time, this theme may not exist in this particular context. So understand your limitations with this kind of research. Be meticulous in demonstrating linkages as you make generalizations. Now, I think we should be able to discuss this extensively when we talk about analysis. Yesterday, Crippen hinted on it in one of the explanations he gave. When we are doing, when we are analyzing qualitative data, we start by creating transcripts of recordings, whatever it is that we did. Then from those transcripts, we start coding where we pick out certain themes that are the same. Then when we come to software, let's say like using Atlas TI, you will provide linkages. Maybe you will point out that I'll give you an example from my research where I may have where I picked out things that affect that rural health seekers see as of value in terms of seeking for health care. And when I selected them, I then pointed them out as value creation variables. And I created that theme and I created those linkages. And I said, if an application you rather identified this theme, this may probably be picked up by a rural health seeker and say they will use this application because it directly answers a healthcare need. For a healthcare facility or healthcare worker, they may not see, they may not want to diagnose a patient remotely. That doesn't add value for them. But they may want to communicate some information to a healthcare seeker. Maybe come for your appointment if you are maybe an expectant mother. Take your medication on time. Informing them of certain activities that may happen, or we are going to have vaccination at time XYZ, or warning them against using maybe taking drugs without prescription or without proper testing or things like that. In that situation, you're picking out themes. You're picking out themes and creating linkages. So I'll show you an example in when we come to analysis of linkages that can be done using things like Atlas TI. You must be diligent in reporting alternative explanations. Yeah, you want to provide a holistic view. If you observed something, it isn't only one perspective. You may find a respondent may be biased towards one thing. Another respondent brings another perspective. Be diligent about reporting, giving a holistic view. Honesty and transparency. This is where it is key that you have a verbatim report where you may decide to give a direct quote made by a respondent so that you try to be as transparent as possible and as reporting back directly to the respondent. Remember, with qualitative research, we are looking at our perspective we are saying that we want to go back to whose reality counts. As a researcher, you want as much as possible to divorce yourself from what is being reported. Your feelings, your perspectives. It is the feeling and the perspective of the respondent that matters. So in designing for reliability, there are three areas we think about, and I've hinted on this time and time again. One is triangulation, when we try to use multiple sampling strategies. Two, investigation triangulation. We try to observe from use more than one observer. That's, for example, if I'm the researcher, I may employ somebody else also to give me their perspective. This may be a little bit expensive. If you're more than one researcher doing it, then you can try to get the perspectives of all. You can also have multiple triangulation. This is where I use several or multiple methods and data types that we try to use. Then methodological triangulation, when you use several methods to try and come up with a conclusion. So there are times we can say, I'm going to maybe use case study, and at the same time, I'm going to use ethnography. That is basically using more than one method. So essentially, triangulation is a key point in trying to bring about reliability in qualitative research. You may decide to use multiple triangulation in terms of data collection, and you leave out others. You may say, I'm going to focus on reporting on several perspectives, as many perspectives as I possibly can. Collect as much data as I possibly can in data triangulation. You may say, I'm going to focus on these two to try and give me reliability. You may not be able to use all of them, considering that this is a master's research, it's academic, it is time bound. So you may not use all of them, but triangulation is key. Key points or key terms that we want to take note of as we carry out qualitative research. First is transferability. Is it possible for my findings to be related somewhere else? This is where you may have purposive sampling. In situations where you have purposive sampling. Purposive is when you purposefully select a certain group, a certain case study. Is it possible for me to transfer this, to generalize my findings to another area? One, there you may want to indicate how your specific area, sampled area you've picked, how it is typical of other areas where you may generalize. In previous slides, we saw something like that. So you may want to compare the context of your the sampled area to other areas so that you may be able to generalize to a certain extent. Dependability. Using audit trails through your data, trying to see if your data is dependable. Okay. Here, you may want to look at using several data collection methods to go back to your research, or rather to generalize your research or to validate your data. Two, we can also say that when we ensure that we keep our raw data so that anyone can come back to our raw data and another researcher can come back to our raw data, or supervisor or whoever it is that is going to look at our research, look at our raw data and determine that, yes, this person actually did make a recording. That is one. You take pictures to ensure that, yes, I actually did do the research. You actually leave an audit trail to pinpoint that my research was actually genuine. I did go to the context. I did spend time there. I did talk to certain X number of respondents. and these were the transcripts, maybe in terms of a recording, in terms of a written transcript, and so on and so forth. That audit trail is really important. Confirming the audit trail. This goes back to what I just discussed earlier, showing the connections between the data and the researcher's interpretation, the raw data and what you've interpreted later. Credibility. This is where we use persistent observations and using multiple data collection methods and using theory, existing theory, to guide our research. A key point I want to emphasize here, as you're all doing your research, ensure that if you're going to examine anything, especially in a qualitative perspective, ensure that you have theory that you're falling back to, theory that guides you on what it is you need to look for in your context. So this theory you must indicate this in your first chapter, in your literature review, and if possible, if you have a chapter specifically on theory. Normally that this may not be necessary, but it is a key point that must be there in your literature review chapter. So in summary, what are the key things that we want to pick out? One, qualitative research is highly contextual. Highly contextual. It depends on a specific context. So normally you will find case study strategy is used, normally. If not, multiple case study strategy is used. Qualitative research is not built upon unified theory. We may use theory, we will use theory to guide us in maybe inquiry, but when we say unified theory, what essentially we are saying is theory that actually determines variables that we are going to pick out. Qualitative research analysis does not necessarily follow data gathering. That's a strange thing. Qualitative research data analysis does not necessarily follow data gathering. You may actually start your analysis even before you gather your data. And also as you gather your data, you start analysis. You remember we talked about diaries. If a research is highly qualitative, it is a good idea for the researcher to go with a diary and immediately begin to take notes, certain things that come out, certain themes that already come out. So even as the researcher is collecting data in a space of 6 months, 1 year, they have already started analysis. Sometimes they may start with analysis on paper as they are in the field and then after. So it's quite a laborious process. This is quite different from quantitative analysis, where you first collect your data and then analyze it afterwards. Quite different. Even though there are various schools of qualitative research, and these are listed here, they all have one element in common. The inductive approach. So the approach is generally we collect our data, we develop themes, which themes, remember we said we can even have started identifying these themes as we collect the data. So we develop the themes and then later on we come to developing our theory. We've discussed inductive approach and deductive approach here extensively. We have seen that the data collection tools or methods, which include transcripts, observations, you can have photographs, videos, and so on and so forth. A decision on whether to attempt generalization needs to be built within the research design. You may have to decide from the beginning whether your research is generalizable or not. I'll give you an example of my research. If you looked at my topic, my overall topic for my thesis, it says towards, meaning my research cannot yet be generalized. So because it was highly qualitative, it cannot be generalized. So you may have to have something like that towards a framework, towards a model, because your research may not be generalized. You can generalize up to a certain extent. For qualitative research to achieve rigor, we must be able to instill a sense of trustworthiness, authenticity, credibility, and transferability. Those things where we say we even as we report, you point back to the respondent, what somebody said. You have as a backup your raw data, which you even submit together with your report, so that transparency and authenticity is seen throughout your research. Now, qualitative research is a very interesting subject area. It has its drawbacks, but it also has its strengths. One of the things that I particularly love about it is that it gives a holistic picture. Really, in an area where you may not understand fully a specific phenomena, it gives a holistic picture or perspective, and it allows for other researchers to come in. Two, the other thing that I truly love about it as a researcher is that it gives opportunity to the context, to participants to speak their truth and really remove some of the dictatorships that we may find with quantitative research. I say this not to put down quantitative research. Quantitative research is extremely good, and I have used it in certain projects. I've used it in certain areas. But when we really want to understand the context, a specific context, when we, let's say as IS researcher, we want to understand users, qualitative research is extremely important. If, let's say as IS research, we want to look at specifically robustness, then we may say, let's do an experimental research, or we can even do case study where we give certain users and simply observe people's behaviors, as they interact with the system. We can do that. But if we really want to understand the perspective of a user, qualitative research is extremely important. For ICT students, if we're looking at issues, let's say issues of governance, issues of policy, whatever it is, strategy, policy, qualitative research can be extremely helpful. It can be extremely advantageous in giving us a holistic view. So ultimately, the approach you pick really depends on the kind of data the kind of study you're doing, the kind of data you want to collect. So I thank you for listening. And I'm going to, like I stated in the previous video, I'm going to create a discussion forum where we can post questions and thoughts on these two topics, and then we can have an extensive discussion on Friday. I thank you for listening to me. Let us meet on Friday.